Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, babbling about psychology and theology. So this year, the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity had our annual conference in Glendale, Arizona. So the following is just my rundown, sort of my reflection, my thoughts, some of the main highlights of the conference and the training that I got to experience there. So here we go. If you're not familiar with the Alliance, it was formerly known as NARTH, the National Association for the Research and Therapy of Homosexuality. They changed their name in 2014 to the Alliance because it's now become more global as it's partnered with the IFTCC, the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. And because also to show more of their emphasis on advocacy as well as research and developing therapeutic approaches for unwanted same-sex attraction and gender confusion. So if you want more details, I have a video going a little more into the history of the Alliance and my prior experiences at other conferences, and I'll put a link to that in the description. So this year we were in Glendale, Arizona, which is just right outside Phoenix. It was beautiful. We had awesome weather. They were calling for rain, but yet it held off. It was just beautiful outside. And we were hosted by the Arizona Christian University, which is also where Dr. Carolyn Pela, one of the past presidents of the Alliance, teaches. So that was a real joy to experience another sort of hometown of one of the Alliance members and just visit the campus. Beautiful campus. Seems like a really good school. So, and interdenominational. So if you're interested in finding a good Christian university, that's not, out west, that sounds like a good one. Now, if you're out east, I'm going to definitely plug where I work, right here, University of Valley Forge. So like I said, it was just beautiful. I had actually been to Arizona about 14 years ago, 2004-ish, on a missions trip. We had a church plant that we were helping with. That was part of our congregation or our fellowship, Praise Chapel. That was in Tucson, and then so we were there for several days, and then drove up to Phoenix for a youth conference. So I hadn't been there since, and I loved it. And it was still very warm, even though we're at the end of September, and just great weather. So I got there at a good time. So there were a bunch of workshops and keynote addresses at this conference that really stood out to me. I always take a lot of notes. I'm a very avid note taker. So I'm just going to go over all the workshops that I went to. I was able to go to the majority of them. There were some sessions where there's two workshops going on simultaneously, so I tried to go to a variety of workshops so I can get a good breadth of knowledge. First workshop I went to was the workshop by David Pickup and Robert Vazzo about image transformation therapy. They had just more recently finished training in how to do image transformation therapy, and so they're presenting how they've been, just the approach in general, and also how they've been applying to their work as reintegrative therapists. Now, image transformation therapy, or IMTT for short, was developed by Robert Miller. There's a couple main books you would get if you wanted to study it. That would be Image Transformation Therapy and The Feeling State, Theory and Protocols for Behavioral and Substance Addictions, both by Robert Miller. So this is an approach that's very effective for both addictions and trauma, which really, when we're working with clients with sexual identity conflicts, most of the time it boils down to those two things: some form of addiction, behavioral issue, as well as some trauma. Now, by trauma, it doesn't necessarily mean like some sort of violent abuse or assault, but it could also mean any shaming experience from your life. So, and that's fairly broad. So there's a few different protocols that are part of image transformation therapy, designed to relieve the psychological stress from trauma. And the main idea is that rather than the traumatic event itself, it's the pain and terror that are stored in images that are the source of trauma. Now, by images, that means memories, thoughts, feelings, sounds, any sort of sensory experience that gets all associated with the traumatic experience. And so there are a couple of protocols to help clients work through that. And this workshop was really great because they gave us the theory, but then we also, in this workshop, all together worked through an example. They sort of worked us through one of the protocols. So there's the pain terror protocol and then the image deconstruction protocol. So for the demonstration, it was really fascinating. The way you apply the image transformation therapy is you come up with like an image of, or a snapshot of the traumatic memory. And we're not so much trying to heal the memory itself, but work on the feelings that are associated with it. And so there's a lot of use of your imagination. So you sort of assign a color to that particular memory, and then you, through guided imagery and maybe some form of hypnosis or self-hypnosis, as one of the other attendees pointed out, you gradually deconstruct. You sort of start breaking down the image and pixelating it. And as you do that repeatedly, the emotions that are associated with that memory begin to lose their power, and they dissipate as well. So you drain the color from the image, and you decompose the image itself. And you just keep repeating this until the client can no longer pull up the image. It's like they won't, the memory's still there, but they just can't seem to draw it up and bring with it all the emotions. So if this sounds familiar, it's the outcomes and the effects are very similar to EMDR, except it sounds like something you can do without all the equipment, because usually a lot of EMDR stuff has a very tight protocol, and there's sometimes some equipment involved. So this sounds like a good alternative to EMDR. But the other thing that's good about this is there's not a reprocessing of the trauma or reprocessing of the memory. It's just, you don't relieve the trauma or the feeling. They don't, according to Robert Miller, it doesn't really help to reprocess the trauma at all. So it's just about breaking down the image and removing the power from the traumatic memory. So I found this a very fascinating workshop. I think a lot of people did. And I was curious to see how this impacts reintegrative therapy. If you're familiar with Dr. Nicolosi's model, formerly called reparative therapy, there are several sort of models or modes within reparative therapy, now called reintegrative therapy. And so for a period of time, there might be a body work where you use sensing the feelings in your body and experiencing those, and then linking those to past experiences, and continuing doing that work to get to the root feelings and reprocessing those. So I was talking with David Pickup after the workshop, and essentially they're using more image transformation therapy in place of the body work, and sometimes in place of the EMDR that they've been using more recently. So it's another way to address the trauma that may be at the root to a lot of the feelings and behaviors. So that was a really cool workshop. Then there was a session with Dr. Laura Haynes about the Confessions and Transgressions of the American Psychological Association. And if you know anything about Dr. Laura Haynes, she is an intense researcher, and she is a very strong critic of the APA and their lack of honesty when it comes to sexuality and holding the public accountable to what the research actually shows. So in 2014, the APA produced the APA Handbook of Sexuality and Psychology, Volumes 1 and 2. And the main editor and chief writer was Lisa Diamond. If you're familiar with Lisa Diamond, she is a lesbian psychologist who does a lot of research on sexual fluidity or sexual attraction fluidity. And her research has been instrumental in showing how attraction is not as stable or immutable as the public believes, and even as the APA just sort of continues to teach, or that institutions teach. And so she's been calling for quite some time for a paradigm shift and letting people know, hey, the born that way, the gay gene theory, it's dead. There's no evidence for it, and we need to let that go. And she tries to make the point that we don't really need a genetic basis for same-sex attraction in order to argue for equal rights or just protections for LGBT people. So Dr. Haynes was just going through a lot of things that are in that handbook that Lisa Diamond co-authored, and looking at the current research and showing how the APA itself officially acknowledges several things that most people aren't aware of. So this was a very good workshop. You can go to Laura Haynes' website and get even more details. But here's some basic things that she went into. Now, the APA refers to their handbook of sexuality and psychology as like the most authoritative thing they've ever produced on sexuality. So keep that in mind, because the handbook itself is showing how the APA is now admitting that born that way and cannot change is simply not true. And the public really needs to hear this. Now, of course, people don't just choose their sexual orientation or their attractions, but non-heterosexual orientations are constantly changing all around us. So that's one thing the handbook acknowledges. Most recently, there's the massive study using the human genome by Ghana et al. That showed there is no gay gene, and if anything, there are several genes that are heritable with homosexuality, as well as a bunch of other traits, but it only accounts for about, it's a very strange range, from 8 to 25% of heritability. So anyone competent with understanding research would say this pretty much shows there is no true genetic determinism for homosexuality. We also looked at the fraternal birth order effect theory, which has been gaining popularity. You probably have seen TED Talks about this one. This is the idea that, it's a strange one, that as a mom has more and more sons, she then has a maternal immune response that will cause the youngest son to have same-sex attraction. It's very bizarre, but there's some big holes in this whole theory. For one, if it explains anything, it only explains things for males. And the idea is that the more older brothers, then the greater the effect. So that also means it has no way of explaining things for only children, or in cases where the one with same-sex attraction is the oldest brother. And it doesn't even consider psychological conditions, such as the older brothers being rejecting or bullying. There's a lot of bullying that can happen in families with a bunch of boys. And so if you're not going to consider that possibility as a nurture perspective, that's a huge confound to this theory. Now, Diamond and her colleague Rosik also have been criticizing the APA in their 2008 statement that homosexuality is not chosen. Now, this is interesting because they're usually saying that you don't choose anything, and we wouldn't say ourselves that same-sex attraction is something chosen. But at least Diamond and Rosik are being honest in saying that there's a degree of choice in our sexuality. A degree of it. So that's interesting that she says that. Now, the APA is not communicating that their own handbook shows that homosexuality can change. The handbook also shows that the etiology or the causation of transgenderism and transgender identities is largely unknown still. Now you would think that, based on what the public says, that, oh, we already know it's because of they have the opposite sex brain. But the honesty of the handbook shows it's really unknown. We don't have enough knowledge for what causes that. But regardless, the twin studies that we have dispute a biological cause. And then Dr. Haynes ended her presentation with a criticism of gay affirming therapies, showing that it can be harmful in different ways, as it offers no hope for change for those who actually do want change in some extent. It can potentially cause isolation from family members and from one's faith community and one's perception of God. And it may give false hopes of being relieved of all symptoms of depression and suicidality that may not go away just because one has come to accept a gay identity. So that was Dr. Haynes' presentation. Like I said, check out her website. She does a lot of research and a lot of writing. She's retired from clinical practice, and she's devoted herself just to doing research and writing and holding the APA accountable in whatever way she can. So she's very passionate about what she does, and check out her resources. She's got a lot to offer. Next, Dr. Christopher Rosik presented the results from the 4 options survey. A few years ago, they announced this study that he was involved with that was interviewing people who experienced same-sex attraction or identified as LGBT, and was just gathering some demographics and results on their assessments of their satisfaction with their relationship statuses. So the results are in. It's been published this year, so he presented the outcome. Now, this study set a bit of a precedent because the research team was very diverse. Now, most of the researchers were based in Salt Lake City, so the majority of them had a Mormon background, except for Dr. Rosik. But you had both gay or gay-affirming or gay ally psychologists, as well as a couple conservative ones, such as Ty Mansfield and Dr. Rosik, to help bring some viewpoint diversity to the research team. Now, I wonder to some extent if the research is a bit skewed because the majority of the research team were gay affirming, so they probably had more of their clients involved in the research, or people that they know in their circles involved in the research. So some of the numbers, I'm a bit skeptical on them, but we'll take them as is. But it did get pretty big. It ended up with almost 1,500 participants. And they broke down all of the people into 4 different categories. So SC, which is single and celibate, SNC for single and not celibate, MOR for people that are in mixed orientation relationships. That would be someone who has some degree of same-sex attraction with someone who only has opposite-sex attraction. And then SSR, which is same-sex relationship. Now, they found that there are levels of satisfaction among all 4 types of relationship statuses. However, for those that were in a relationship, whether it was mixed orientation or same-sex, their level of satisfaction was double of those who were single. So that's something important to keep in mind, that being in a relationship ultimately is more satisfactory than being single, unfortunately, for those who are single. But doesn't mean that they didn't have any degree of satisfaction, the single groups. Interestingly, for both partnered groups, the older participants were, and the longer they had been in the relationship, the less satisfied they were in their relationship option. And as you would probably assume, participants in the same-sex relationship report the most amount of same-sex attraction compared to those in mixed orientation relationships. So those with same-sex attraction that were in the MORs likely had attractions to both the same and opposite sex, or their attraction to the same sex was greatly decreased compared to those in the same-sex relationships. Kind of obvious. So as he went through the results, he pointed out a couple of clinical upshots. One was that psychotherapy to increase client satisfaction might explore how to help clients meet these 6 following needs: connection, intimacy, and mutual understanding, some form of relationship commitment, physical or sexual intimacy, authentic sexual expression, resolution of conflicts with religion, and reduction of depression and anxiety. Now, for the single and celibate group, the variable most strongly and positively related to satisfaction was resolving conflicts between their sexuality and their religion. So if they're single celibate, it was because they had a stronger allegiance to their faith and their values over their sexual desires. Also positively related to satisfaction was having a negative view of masturbation. So the less that they were accepting of masturbation, the more satisfied they were in their singleness. Other factors were less internalized homonegativity that helped increase their satisfaction. For those who are single and not celibate, expressing sexuality in ways that feel best and meeting needs for connection, intimacy, and mutual understanding were most positively related to satisfaction. They also had a greater need to reduce depression and anxiety. As they did that increased their satisfaction. Depression was very significant in this particular group, the single and not celibate. For those in the mixed orientation marriage group, meeting needs for connection, intimacy, and mutual understanding, as well as reducing depression, were most important for their satisfaction. And as I mentioned before, they are more likely to have opposite sex attraction compared to the other groups, and so that was most related to them with satisfaction as well. And like the single and celibate group, viewing masturbation negatively and resolving conflicts with their religion were both associated with more satisfaction with their option. For those in the same-sex relationships, meeting needs for connection, intimacy, and mutual understanding, and having an authentic expression, sexual expression, were the only 2 variables uniquely related to satisfaction for this group. So the clinical upshot for them would be therapists working with those in SSRs may wish to explore what constitutes an authentic sexual expression for each client and explore options to improve relationship quality and examine how these options affect satisfaction and health. So in general, the takeaway with this survey was that the results counter social assumptions that expect all same-sex attracted persons to be dissatisfied and unhealthy either in a same-sex relationship or a heterosexual relationship or a single status. So because it showed there's levels of satisfaction in all 4. So it kind of goes against assumptions that are in both the liberal end and the conservative end. Next up, Drs. Carolyn Pela and Phil Sutton presented an update on the longitudinal study that they introduced a few years ago, and that is titled The Sexual Attraction, Fluidity, and Well-Being in Men, a Therapeutic Outcome Study. Now, originally, Carolyn Pela and Dr. Joseph Nicolosi began this study, but halfway through the study, Dr. Nicolosi passed away. The work continued, though, because he wasn't the only clinician that was doing the therapy. The clients continued with other therapists that were part of his practice and his son's practice, and they were able to continue the work. They were halfway through a 5-year longitudinal study. And they were measuring 2 things, how reintegrative therapy would affect change in attractions, as well as how it affects well-being. And so they're currently trying to get this study published. They've had some difficulty finding a reputable journal or one that'll get to a lot of people's eyes, that'll reach a lot of people, that will accept them. And so this study has been scrutinized intensely, way more than most other studies in this whole peer review process. So they keep having to do revisions, but Dr. Pela says that it just makes the paper even stronger. So I can't wait for them to finally publish the study. I've been waiting anxiously to hear what the results are, and once it's published, then I'm definitely going to do a separate video just on this study. For now, here's what some of the results were. Now, there's 75 participants that were going to Dr. Nicolosi's practice, first at the Thomas Aquinas Institute and then at the Breakthrough Clinic that Joseph Nicolosi Jr. runs. Okay, and they measured the baseline and then compared with the final scores their distress, anxiety, relationships, social roles. So like I said, they were measuring two different things: the frequency of opposite and same-sex attraction experiences, behavior, and identity, as well as tracking their emotional distress, anxiety, any negative relationship patterns and social roles, depression. So they wanted to see both well-being and attraction change. Results: they found a decrease in same-sex attraction experiences, an increase in opposite-sex attraction experiences, and an increase in opposite-sex attraction identity. And also an improvement in well-being, so much so that it exceeded the reliable change index requirements. In this study, 46% were in full recovery, 11% were reliably improved, 15% no change because there wasn't enough of a need to change, at least I guess with the well-being aspects. 18% were trending toward improvement, and 2.5% were trending toward deterioration. And those who were reliably worse were 5%. So there's some negative outcomes as well when it came to well-being. But keep in mind that in regular therapy, 5 to 10% of participants deteriorate and would consider therapy harmful to their well-being. So the treatment was actually congruent with just regular therapy for other issues. We'll go over this more in depth once this study is finally published. I can't wait. So stay tuned. One of the other big things at the conference was the Alliance's attorney, Geoff Heath, presented on the Client Protection Initiative. I actually came across this myself a few months ago when I was on the Alliance's website doing some research for my conversion therapy myths and misunderstanding series that I completed. So there's a few things that show up in this no harm initiative. There's a section about principled leadership that sort of lays out what our commitments are as the Alliance and definitions of certain terms. There's a harm reporting mechanism where if you believe you've been harmed by any therapists who are practicing change-oriented therapies or sexual attraction, fluidity exploration therapy, that you could report it to them and they will assess it and give you some feedback and make recommendations if you need to report it to a licensing board. And a model legislation, meaning a bill that could be used by anyone who would like to present to their state. Legislation that would protect clients as well as uphold clients' rights to obtain the therapy that fits their own values. Now, when I had first come across this, I wasn't too sure what to think at first, and as I studied it more, I actually had some criticisms of a few parts of this whole initiative. Some of the definitions I disagreed with, and I had some concerns about how the harm reporting mechanism might be used. And there's some gaps, some things that are overlooked in the model legislation. So actually, prior to the conference, I had emailed the board with my concerns. And I was happy. I wasn't too sure how they're going to receive my criticism. I might have come off a little too strongly, but I was happy to see that Geoff really appreciated the things I pointed out about the legislation, at least that part. And they didn't address all my concerns, but for the most part, his presentation sort of eased some of my concerns about the legislation part. Really, the bottom line is with all these therapy bans that are happening, we're allowing the opposition to set the tone and have the first say. And we've been playing defense all along. And as an attorney, Geoff really showed us how the process works, and that was pretty eye-opening. For starters, the party who makes the legislation or the regulation is the one who defines the public narrative. And that's so important. We've been on the defensive and having to explain things when our opposition is already creating the terms and controlling the debate. The initiating party defines the terms. As I just said, the initiating party gets the most publicity and the chance to make the case first and longest in the legislative processes. So the bill's sponsor gets an hour to present their case. The next is split for pros and cons for discussion. So if you're trying to oppose a therapy ban bill, you barely get a chance to present your side. And so the initiator has a first opportunity to claim that they care about clients who may be harmed by bad therapies that might be out there. So instead of us being on the defensive, we need to embrace certain things. Like, we have no problem embracing the we are against harming kids narrative. Now, instead of us just saying, well, there is no harm, which for the most part is true, we can simply just, sure, we totally agree, unless we'll run with you on that. If there's any therapies that are out there or therapists who are harming clients, we're against that as well. So we don't have a reason to oppose that aspect of the narrative. But they then use that as a straw man for therapy in general for same-sex attraction or gender confusion. And that's where we need to define the terms ourselves. So with the model legislation, it takes care of a lot of the claims that the opposition has. Like, okay, they say that it's harmful. Well, let's make sure we're all in agreement that it's harmful, and we're going to eliminate all the things that they say is harmful about the therapies that we offer, such as shaming techniques or aversive techniques. And if we show that, yeah, we're against all those same things too, will they co-sponsor a bill like that? If we're addressing all the concerns they say they have about coercion, shaming techniques, and using restraints and ice baths and electroshock therapies, if we're all against that, then work with us together. We'll oppose it together. Now, we suspect that most likely that once we show that we're against the same things, then their true colors show, and it's really about ideology. And they'll oppose anything we offer just on the basis of disagreeing with the goals of the client's therapy and what the client's goals are. So it'll probably be the best way for us to really expose. We may not be able to pass such a legislation, but it'll help show our opposition's true colors. And that's part of the point. Though it would be great if we could pass this legislation, because it would protect clients from harm as well as protect them from having their rights taken away. So that actually was a really good presentation. Got very lively at times. There was some discussion, some people who didn't quite understand the spirit behind the legislation approach, and others who just didn't think it was doing enough. So it got kind of lively at times, which is great. We had to talk that stuff out. Michael Cox from Utah, he then did a presentation on more of a cognitive behavioral approach for unwanted same-sex attraction. Just a very practical approach, mostly focusing on the behaviors and thoughts. So, not too concerned about, okay, what are the causes? It's like maybe it's caused by this, maybe it's caused by that, maybe we just don't know. But here's the behaviors, here are the mindsets, and we can focus on those. So he presented more of a practical approach to dealing with same-sex behavior and attractions. And so he was discussing what he calls the change cycle, which is very just common CBT conceptualization of just problem behaviors. So there would be first a situation one of a loss of control, some sort of interaction, and especially one that's more frequent on a regular basis. And so we develop primary behaviors to cope with this negative situation. But these primary behaviors will still end up causing us some level of pain or discomfort. And so then we're faced with a choice. Do we change the behavior, or do we defend the behavior using defense mechanisms? So to defend ourselves against awareness or feelings of pain and discomfort. So you got your very common defense mechanisms that anyone who at least is familiar with psychoanalysis is aware of. So, but there's some other unique ones in there as well. Depression can be a defense. It's a cluster of symptoms. It can become a lifestyle. Defenses are all about self-protection and self-soothing. They maintain the status quo. They're not curative, though. They temporarily reduce pain. They also form a new set of behaviors, such as avoiding people that we believe can sense our problem. These secondary behaviors create more pain and discomfort. So as we become dissatisfied with these defense mechanisms, hopefully it'll get us to the point where we decide, let's change the behavior. So we can change. Now realize, willpower is not enough. It takes more than just willpower to change everything. But you can work on changing attitude and behavior. It's about being smarter, not stronger. So you can work on changing beliefs and values about the behavior. So increase the length of time in the thinking stage before a behavior. Change your thoughts about the behavior. Replace with positive alternatives. Ask the why question. Why do I do this one? Get inside the behavior. Get insight into the behavior. And that will eventually produce real change that's manifested, which then informs new behaviors, which then become more solidified as they increase happiness and love and connection with others. And continued pain or discomfort encourages or motivates more change. So you don't want to remove natural consequences. Use the natural consequences to fuel more change. I like what he said, that we can address the defense without having to fix the cause of the problem. So even if you don't get down to the core issue, or what is the root to my same-sex attraction, if you look at, well, here's the way I've responded to different things, and here's how I keep maintaining the same-sex behaviors and attractions, work on those, maybe you can at least address the outcome of everything without even having to get to the root of it all. So that would be more of a cognitive behavioral approach, very different from your standard reintegrative therapy or psychoanalytic approach to same-sex attraction. I also attended a workshop by Janae Juarez. She is a therapist in different Native American reservations in Arizona. So she did a presentation on the different tribes in Arizona and gives a lot of the background of their culture and their history. So that was just very interesting in general. I love the multicultural aspect of just psychology. I really appreciate us incorporating more multicultural aspects to what we do. Now, she mostly was addressing their culture in general and just other mental health issues within their culture, not too much specifically about homosexuality or transgenderism, but she did get into the concept of two-spirit, which for that little bit, that was very interesting. If you're familiar, in the transgender community, they often will bring up two-spirit as evidence that Native Americans have always had a term for people who are transgender. The idea that you have a male and female spirit, or you transfer from one to the other, and it's used to argue that it's always been something accepted within Native American cultures. So I was curious to see if there was more to that concept, and it turns out there was, because in the tribes, two-spirit is not necessarily referring to LGBT. It simply is referring to someone who is able to be in two places simultaneously. Now, that could mean that it's someone with a man's body but feels more like a woman. It could be, but not necessarily. It could refer to other sort of different personas someone could have or modes of operating. So it's not truly an LGBT issue. It's also about viewed as the ability to hold a balance between male and female sides of self. So they understand that within both male and females, there's both masculinity and femininity. And so the two-spirit will be the one who has more of a balance. Some tribes, which most people might have heard of this, honored two spirits and saw them as healers, seers, name givers, shamans, and so had more of a position of honor for them. Saw them as people who were in the margins, who were able to be between worlds, not just sexually or in a gender way, but also spiritually. Now, as Christianity was introduced into the tribes, two spirits were then finding themselves being persecuted, either killed or abandoned, unfortunately. Okay, so the gay natives left for larger cities when they found they weren't accepted by their tribes. However, they also struggled with being accepted by the white LGBT communities. Another thing I found really interesting was when it comes to Native American cultures and their religion, it's the tradition itself that is the religion. So if we talk about religious rights and freedoms for the Native American tribes, the application would be their traditions. That is really, it's all integrated. So it's important to note that within their traditions, there are gender-based rituals. So gender is still something that's valued. They understand there's male and there's female. Just because there's the accommodation for people that they consider two-spirit doesn't mean that they negate the whole concept of gender entirely. So she gave some insights that was very interesting, and also about the cultures, such as the Gila River Pima tribe. They are, as a culture, more maternal. So that was interesting. Then Christopher Doyle, he presented part 2 of what he started last year as a training in his new family systems approach for sexual minority youth. And so I was eager for him to do this one because he had done part of it last year, and he had a lot of footage from a documentary he was part of with one of his clients and that client's family. So he showed more clips from that. He got into some more research as well, just on the statistics of children or youth with same-sex attraction or LGBT identities. So unfortunately, that sort of took up more time than I would have liked. So he didn't get into a lot of the practical stuff with his approach until the end. Might have run out of some time there. But one thing he notes is a lot of the families that come to him asking him to work with their child who's got same-sex attraction come with this misunderstanding that the goal of therapy is for him to change their child, change their son, change their attractions, change their identity. And they're often disappointed when he reveals that's not what he's actually doing. He's treating the entire family. And they often just want to shove the child off and have him fix the child. So I really appreciate how he makes it clear, no, the whole family is the client, and there's systems, and I'm not even going to address the sexuality directly. Whether the child's attractions change or not are secondary to you guys operating in a more healthy way as a family. I think that's really important for people watching this video to understand that people take an approach like Christopher Doyle's. We're not pushing an agenda, and ultimately we do care more about healthier families. Now, will that ultimately maybe increase the possibility of attraction change in a child? Possibly. And of course we're open to that, and that's something we hope for even. But the goal of the therapy isn't just to change the child's attractions. It's for the family to learn to be more loving, to be more present, to meet needs in healthy ways, which is really a lot of times at the root to the attractions in general. So, but we're not going to address the attractions in a very direct manner usually, at least when it comes to family therapy. So he borrows a lot from Murray Bowen, very famous family systems theorist. And he has the theory that anxiety from the family of origin passes down to the next generation. There's a lot of use of genograms and seeing what the relationships are between different family members. And it's very important to process the family trauma. And taking this approach means teaching the family healthy communication and boundaries. And so part of his approach is to do these intensive family weekends. So he showed more clips from him doing that with his clients. David Pickup did a presentation on standing for truth in psychology. And it was really just a very motivational workshop, just preaching to the choir, but also giving some practical tips and reminders that we need to make sure we are always pairing truth with compassion. We need both. You can't have one without the other. And we're seeing more and more that how LGBT activism is all based on born gay and cannot change. That's been their mantra for years. And we're seeing that the gay rights movement and the LGBT activists' strategies that are laid forth in the Gay Manifesto from 1987 have just been all coming true today. And he just reminded us, well, we as therapists in this field, we have become a transference object for the activists. They won't debate our ideas. They'll just call you a bad person, which is a projection. So get used to it. I'm not expecting to change and the opposition's point of view, but mostly we're trying to help those who are on the sidelines who don't know much about the topic. And he discouraged us from getting enraged ourselves. We see a lot of rage from the opposition. We need to keep ourselves from getting enraged, because rage is really, it's always wrong. It's anger plus victimhood. And we need to realize we need confidence so that we don't fall into a victimhood stance either and then just become full of anger. And our strongest argument is that every client has a right to therapy that helps them be their authentic self. And he gave us some practical tips on how to address political activists' challenges to our clients' rights for therapy. So if someone says, I was harmed by conversion therapy, well, what are some possible responses we could have? Well, tell me more. It showed genuine concern. You have to be authentic. If they are genuinely harmed, I want to know. I'm going to defend that person as well. I don't want them being harmed. So display openness. Don't react. I'm not just going to be like, I doubt it. You're all wrong. Well, let's find out more what they mean. So be strong and caring, which is all about the salience that Nicolosi speaks about. You want to show that you're benevolent, but also that you're strong. And you're going to help advocate for them as well. Oh, this is one that's very common these days. 700,000 people underwent conversion therapy or will undergo conversion therapy every year. And so many have been abused. Now, this is coming from the Williams Institute report. It's not peer-reviewed. It's all based on self-report. And most of it is just a lot of conflation with those who just go to, say, a church that upholds a traditional sexual ethic or views on marriage, and they're referring to that as conversion therapy. Just being part of a community that supports traditional marriage. They call that conversion therapy. So it inflates these numbers, make it sound like we got hundreds of thousands of people going to this harmful therapy. So we had several examples, and moving on. The final workshop I went to was by Monica Breaux, and she presented on sexual appetite formation. And I really wasn't sure what to make of this lady at first. She's a real character, but I figured let me go to her workshop, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was really good. She does a lot of research and creates a lot of her own materials, so check out her website as well. And she explored 3 different areas that help form our sexual appetites. She wasn't just talking about orientation, but just our desires and the types of things we like to do sexually. So the 3 areas were exposure, experience, and expectation. So when it came to exposure, she was discussing conditioning. We can condition ourselves to become attracted to something because that particular stimulus is paired up with sexual climax. So this can influence orgasm by changing what one sees while climaxing. Even watching straight or heterosexual pornography can cause homosexual desires because as a male, you're watching the male for cues of climax. And as you're watching him, you're pairing observations of that male with your own climax and as you're fixated on him. So repeatedly doing that can increase some degree of same-sex attraction that might not have been there before or might have been very minimal previously. There's also the concept of imprinting, and that is how your brain will imprint an early sexual experience, even if it was a harmful one, even if it was even sexual abuse, because there's a possibility of pleasure in any sexual act. So especially if you're young, you don't understand what you're experiencing. You just know your body feels good while you're climaxing or having some sort of orgasm. So even though it's evil and sick and wrong, the experience could be imprinted. And so when later you want to experience something pleasurable, you go back to your earliest sexual experience. And if your earliest sexual experience was same sex or incest or molestation from someone of the same sex, then that might be the same type of experience that you compulsively go toward. So that's also where the idea of repetition compulsion comes from. So we are actually reenacting the trauma in those cases. Another aspect of exposure is brain changes and neuroanatomy, and that pornography creates maps in the brain, and we can use neurofeedback to help explore brain plasticity. When it comes to experience, she discussed the excitation transfer theory. That is where if you pair 2 people together and they're not even attracted to each other, but then they experience something thrilling, like say going on a roller coaster together, the residual excitation gets confused as romance. So experiences can change what you desire. So just spending time with someone and you go through something traumatic, or a coworker even, if you bond through going through something difficult, that can create romantic feelings. So that has impact. Also, there's cybersex and just sexual addiction, that the more you act out, the more it enforces a behavior and an attraction. And then there's expectation. And with homosexuality, there is actually an expectation of non-monogamy. Now, most people that are entering into a same-sex relationship, they don't come in expecting it to be non-monogamous, but they find that usually within the first 3 months, they open the relationship. 42% of the time, it goes into an open relationship. And then that number increases after by 2 years. So it's very rare in homosexual relationships for there to be true monogamy. For more about her model and her resources, you could go to her website, ariseforhim.com. So there's my rundown. There's my highlights of the 2019 Alliance Training Institute conference, and I'm blessed to have gone. I have some thank yous. There's some people who helped enable me to even go this year. My finances have not been so good this year. I did not think I was going to be able to make it because of working part-time as multiple practices. So this summer was a little tight, not getting as many clients as I needed. So I just want to thank everyone at my church, True North Christian Church. They always are a good moral support. And there's some people who'll help pay my way for my flight and some of my expenses because I wouldn't be working while I was down there. They didn't necessarily tell me they wanted their names out there, so I'm just going to put their first names. So it'd be Brandon and John. Thank you guys so much. You guys were a huge blessing. And also Carolyn and Nick, thank you for hosting me. That was a huge honor to spend the time with you guys and explore Arizona a bit. And it was a great trip. I really needed it. Especially living out here, I don't know hardly anyone who knows much about this field. So it's always, I'm like a kid in a candy store when I'm with other people who know stuff about this subject, so I can just talk face to face about this stuff. So I really needed it. I need the intellectual stimulation and the encouragement. So thank you to everyone. Now, for anyone watching me on YouTube or on BitChute, please like, comment, share, subscribe. If you've been to an Alliance conference, share your thoughts. And if you haven't, well, we're going to be in Orlando next year. Hope to see you there. We could definitely use more attendees. There's so many things. I just don't have time to get into it in this video. But you learn so much, and you really make some great connections with people. And it's such a good community at the Alliance. So I encourage you, if you've never been to one of our conferences, please come. It'll be great. Thank you. All right. God bless.